Goody, everybody. I'm Jay Hoopa, and welcome to Bold Hoops with Jay Hoopa. Today, we will be talking about the Portland Trailblazers and what they should do in the offseason to make a roster around Damian Lillard that can go out and compete. I know that many people want Dame gone or traded or whatnot. I don't believe that he should get traded, and I don't think Portland should want to trade him because he is a generational talent and you're not going to find another guy like Dame. If well, the chances that you find someone like him are really low. So let's get a roster around him that can go out and compete. And if you want to see a video where I rebuild Portland in this offseason instead of what I'm doing today, just let me know in the comment section or on Instagram, DM me, and I'll try my best to respond to you. And without further ado, let's get into it. So before I get into any moves and roster breakdown, I want to talk about like what I don't like about Portland's front office. So my biggest problem with them is that they trade for guys that have like 1 year left on their contract. So you're really only getting a 1 year player because the chances are that I'm going to use Jeremy Grant, for example. He is an unrestricted free agent now, and he demands a lot of money. And now that he's a free agent, the chances you're going to sign him are really slim. And I honestly don't think he resigns in Portland. So to make a trade like that to get him over in Portland for 1 year, and that 1 year you don't win anything, that's really crucial to how Portland is failing at building around Dame. Since you need players that have contract length that goes past 1 year in order to build around. Since the chances are you're not going to be successful in one season. So you need guys that you can build with and then like develop chemistry in 1 year and then go out and actually compete the next year. So what I'm going to do, there's some players I do believe Portland should target, but for that same exact problem of them only having 1 year contracts, I'm not going to suggest making a trade for them. All right, so the depth chart you're looking at right now, I'm looking at as well. And at point guard, you have Damian Lillard, and Anthony Simons is also a point guard, but he's a starter. So, like, the point guard spot is very thin for the Trailblazers. So, that's one move I'm going to look into getting is a backup point guard for cheap because if you have Damian Lillard at point guard, your backup point guard's not really going to need a lot of minutes. He's just going to need to be able to run the show when Dame's off the court. And then Anthony Simons, he's a good two guard, but I personally think they need to look to move on from him because he is very young and makes a lot. He makes 24 million, I'm pretty sure, and that's a lot of money that for a player that still needs to develop. And I'm kind of skeptical about it because he might not be the right guy on a championship team to make 24 mil. So I'm definitely going to look into trading him. And then Shaedon Sharpe, I think Shaedon Sharpe's going to be a superstar in this league one day. He showed it towards the end of the season, but there's a lot of value to be had with him. So I might look into a package of Simons, Sharpe, and then the third pick to get Dame a second option when it comes to building a team that can contend. And then at power forward, you got Trendon Watford, who I loved at LSU, but young. He's not going to do much in the NBA, at least right now. I hope he proves me wrong, but not right now. He's not ready. And then Nurkic, your center. There's a lot about Nurkic that I do like, but there's also a lot I don't like. But my main thing about Nurkic is that the center is probably the hardest spot to fill in the NBA today right now because you can't draft big men take time to develop. Let's just put it that way. So you can draft and draft and draft a bunch of big men, and a lot of them aren't gonna pan out. And so having Nurkic, who is a solid big man, like he's not an all-star, he's not the best, but he's also not on the lower end. He's like right in the middle. So and his contract is friendly, $13 million. That's a fair contract for him. So I wouldn't move him if I'm Portland, but I can see a world where they do. And then you got four guys on the bench. You got Keon Johnson, Jabari Walker, Kevin Knox, and Nazir Little. And then that's it. I'm not going to get into depth about them because they're definitely not on a team that wins championship or competes. Nazir Little definitely can be. So I'm going to keep Little, but we'll see what happens with the other three guys. And that's the 9-man rotation for Portland. It's scary, like scary bad. Like you're not competing with this lineup. So you got to look to sign free agents, which Portland does have a lot of money. Like if they don't re-sign Grant, which I don't think they should, assuming they sign the players that I'm going to suggest, they have a lot of money left over. So you're going to be able to build a team. I also want to say that I'm looking at two-way players to go around Dame because yes, he's a smaller guard. So having more two-way players to fill the 2, 3, and 4 spots on your roster would be very beneficial for this team so they can get a boost defensively. A big problem that Portland has right now is that they just got the 3rd pick in the draft. It's a good problem to have, but if you're going to try and build a contender around Dame, you don't need the 3rd pick, which in all likelihood is going to end up being Scoot Henderson unless the Hornets trade their pick. But I think the Hornets are going to I think the Hornets are going to draft Brandon Miller. And I think that's basically a lock. The 1, 2, 3 in this draft are basically locks. Like, just got to look at it as Wembanyama. We all know he's going 1. Brandon Miller is the best prospect for Charlotte. I think Scoot Henderson's a better prospect, but if you already have LaMelo, then you don't need another guard. Like Portland doesn't need another guard. So I think what you have to look at for pick 3 when it comes to trading it is you need to find a team that needs a franchise point guard in Scoot Henderson. So my first of 4 trade scenarios is with the Raptors because I honestly love the idea of Scoot Henderson on the Raptors. But the only problem that I see is the Raptors would have to give up Siakam and Anunoby in order for me to think that Portland's getting enough back in return from Toronto. And Siakam, as I said previously, only has a 1-year contract. So you're trading a 3rd pick for a guy you're only going to have 1 year. It doesn't seem like it's very valuable, in my opinion, to make that trade. And of course, you'd have to give up Simons and Sharp and then whatever draft capital and probably Nurkic in order to make money work. I just don't think that's a win-win trade. I think it's a win for the Toronto Raptors, but I think it's a losing trade for Portland. The next trade is with the Nets. So I've seen a lot of rumors of Damian Lillard going to the Nets, but people need to understand that the Nets are actually losing a few players to free agency and offseason. So I think the Nets need to take a step towards rebuilding, and I think they should trade with Portland Mikal Bridges and Dorian Finney-Smith, and I think that would be a perfect trade and pickups for Portland because Mikal Bridges, phenomenal two-way player, and he can be your second star, as he just showed with Brooklyn. Like, I think he's a perfect fit. And then with Finney-Smith, we saw what he did with Dallas when they went to the conference finals last year. He is a phenomenal defender. Sorry about that. He's phenomenal on the defensive side, and he can shoot the 3 a little bit. So you get 2 defenders that can start right away and have experience because Mikal Bridges was with the Suns when they went to the finals, and then Dorian Finney-Smith was with the Mavericks when they went to the conference finals. So you got experienced defenders, and I think that's a valuable pickup to have if you're Portland. And of course, the Nets get pick 3, whatever else draft capital wise they desire, and then Sharp and Simons. And I think that trade is a win-win, especially for the Nets, since that's a great start to a rebuild, having Scoot, Simons, and sharp. And then the Pistons were interesting, but I honestly don't think you can make a reasonable trade with the Pistons because the only person you want is Bojan Bogdanovic, but he's kind of getting up there in age, and he's not going to bring you enough value for the third pick. And then even if the Pistons did get the third pick, you still have 3 point guards, and drafting Scoot's not going to be any value. But I was considering the idea of making a trade with Detroit. And then the last trade idea I've seen, I don't like. It's with Minnesota for Karl-Anthony Towns. My biggest problem with Karl-Anthony Towns is that he's always in foul trouble, it seems like, when he's in the playoffs, but he's also injury prone and he's not a great defender. So, like, you might need to hide him defensively, but he would have to be your starting center. And you can't hide your center on defense. And, like, as I'm saying, like, as I said with Nurkic, he only makes $13 million. So even if you do have to hide him on defense, it's not like he's taking a huge chunk of your salary. But Karl-Anthony Towns is being paid a huge contract. So you can't really acquire Karl-Anthony Towns with a necessity of hiding him. So that's my problem with trading for Cat. So I'm not going to go farther on that idea. I just finished talking about third pick trade scenarios, but now I want to focus on how we're going to make this team better, not worrying about trades necessarily. So to start, I want to talk about the backup point guard position. I think signing a guy like Shake Milton would be perfect, especially with the moves that I'm planning on making in this video. So stay on for that. But Shake Milton is a perfect sixth man. I think Philly is using him wrong, but there's also not really much he can do in Philly with guards Anthony Melton, James Harden, and Tyrese Maxey. Like, there's not much room for playing time there for him. So I think a change of scenery, since he's an unrestricted free agent, I think if Portland can get their hands on him, he can bring a lot of value off the bench for you. And I also feel the same about Dennis Smith Jr. The way he played for Charlotte Hornets this past year was very eye-opening, especially since he was able to play well on both ends of the floor. So I like an idea of him as a sixth man, but I honestly think Shake Milton is the better option here. So the next thing I want to look at is the free agent targets I think Portland needs to look into getting. So I want to start with Christian Wood, who I think could bring a lot of value, but I think he's going to demand too much money for Portland to actually want to get him. But I think he could be a good power forward for you. But I honestly think like the contract's too much and he doesn't bring enough defensively for a team that's already weak defensively. So I think the same thing that happened in Dallas to him could happen to him if he came to Portland. So I don't like that move for that reason. Next, I want to look into Jay Crowder because Jay Crowder is a phenomenal 3-and-D player. He's one of the best to do it, but he also commands money. But I also think he's getting up there in age. So on a team that wants to contend right now, like you're going to look into getting a 3 to 4 year contract out of everyone you sign if you're Portland. So have going for Crowder, who I think's value is probably $10 million a season. I think that's a lot of money for a guy that can easily age out of being a starting power forward. So I'm not going to get him if I'm Portland. Next, I want to look at Jakob Poeltl, but I honestly don't like that idea because you can't have two centers both making $10+ million. You didn't have Nurkic and made a trade like with the Raptors that sent Nurkic over to Toronto just to make the money work. Jakob Poeltl is a perfect guy to come in and replace Nurkic, but I honestly think they're going to keep Nurkic, so I wouldn't go with Jakob Poeltl. And then, as always, there's been rumors for the past 3 years that Damian Lillard and Draymond Green want to play together. Well, Draymond Green has a player option, but that is a good idea. But again, he's not a two-way player. Like, he's a phenomenal defender, but offensively, it's really scary. And you got to look at it this way: you don't have the shooters around Draymond that you do in Golden State. So I honestly don't like the fit exactly. If Draymond could shoot, however, it would be a great pickup, but I don't have confidence in Green's shooting ability, so I don't like that move. But then again, he also has a player option, so maybe look into it next year if you build enough around Dame and you have shooters that can be around Draymond, then maybe consider it for next season. Then there's Grant Williams, who I love for Portland. He is basically, my idea of it is he is a Draymond Green that can shoot. As I just talked about, Draymond Green can't shoot as well as you would like. So Grant Williams, I would sign him for $8 million, 3 years. Boom, that's your starting power forward. And if you do need to go small because Nurkic isn't a switchable guy, you have Grant Williams who can also play the five. Like he guarded Joel Embiid during this last series against Philly, and he's a viable option to play 3 through 5, and he can space the floor a lot. I think the Celtics need to use him better, but I also know the Celtics are probably the deepest team in the NBA right now, so there's not a lot of room for him to be playing a consistent role. So that I think he's going to leave in free agency, and I think Portland needs to go swoop him up. Like that's a perfect pickup if you're Portland, since he is a phenomenal fit on this team. And then you can also look into Danny Green for floor spacing, but he probably commands too much money as well. So don't go for him. Like my main thing for you, Portland, don't overpay for anybody except for this next guy, Austin Reaves. Austin Reaves is perfect. You can sign him for a 4 year, $20 million contract because, well, you have the money. And if you look at it like how the Lakers can only afford 15 mil a season, so he can't go back to the Lakers if you offer him $20 million a season. Like he's not going to pass that up. So go out and get Reaves. I think he's a perfect guard to play next to for Dame because they both have good court vision and they both can shoot. So they can play off ball from each other. And there's a lot of open space if they're both on the court at the same time because you're not going to leave Austin Reaves wide open. So Damian Lillard has more room to operate, and then vice versa. You're not leaving Dame. So as Austin Reaves shows us in the playoffs that he's a phenomenal shooter and he can also play point guard, I think that just shows that he is worth a $20 million contract. Now I'm going to look at trade targets and trade options, just specifically players they can inquire about, not necessarily do I think they should go and trade for them. But there's one player that if he becomes available, I do think that Portland should make a package for. But first I want to start, as I've already mentioned, Pascal Siakam, but I like him as a second option to Dame, but again, he only has 1 year on his contract, so you're not getting a lot of value there if you make a splash move for him just to have him for 1 year. And then OG Anunoby, I just don't think he is as good as a 2 option as you want because he does make a lot of money and he's not a 2 option on a championship team. So I wouldn't risk my future trying to trade for him as well. Now, if they came in a package deal and you could convince Siakam to get an extension, I'm making that trade. I'm making that trade 110%, but I don't see it happening. Then next, you can inquire about DeMar DeRozan because he's a good 2 option, but I just don't think that he's going to be leaving Chicago, even though I think Chicago should enter a rebuild, which I might do my next video on that. So if you want to see that, let me know. But anyways, I think DeMar DeRozan is a good trade candidate, but then again, he doesn't have floor spacing, so he can't really play off the ball from Dame, in my opinion, since he can't shoot the three at an elite level, but he's a phenomenal player, don't get me wrong. I just don't think his fit alongside Dame is the greatest. Next, I already mentioned Karl-Anthony Towns, but I just want to mention again that I've seen rumors about this, but I am against it 110%. Don't trade for Karl-Anthony Towns, Portland. Please don't. And then I heard other rumors about Joel Embiid. Portland, don't trade for him either. You're going to give up your whole future for Joel Embiid, who, not to knock on him, he didn't perform well in the playoffs, but he also brings in such a big contract for especially a guy who's injury prone in playoffs and a guy who didn't show up in game 7 and has terrible luck in game 7. Like, I know Damian Lillard is one of the most clutch performers in the league, but he needs the help. And going and getting a guy like Joel Embiid, the contract is too big to build around those two players. And we just saw it with Philly, even though I think that the reason Philly lost was because Harden and Embiid didn't show up. If you have another duo like Lillard and Embiid, and then you have less around those two than Philly did. Philly has Maxey, Harris, and Melton and Tucker. Like, they have a lot around those two guys, and they still couldn't get the job done. So making a trade for Embiid is really worrisome especially if you can't sign free agents. So I don't want to go for that move if I'm Portland. And then, it's bold hoops with Jay Hoopa. So what's the bold player? Well, we got Paul George. If the Clippers make him available, I love Paul George with Portland because he is a phenomenal 2 option, but he can also be a 1, in my opinion. But like, he already said that he prefers not being a 1 option and that he realized that in order to win, he can't be a 1 option. So as much as I love the Clippers roster right now, if you could maybe snag Paul George, I mean, I know he has a big contract and all, but he is locked up for a while. So you could build around. So even if you're not competing this year, can definitely compete the year after. Right, since I just discussed targets they should go for, here's who I officially think that Portland should actually sign. Now, they only have 9 players on the roster right now, so you have to sign at least 4. So here's my 4 that I would sign. I would first sign Grant Williams to a 3-year, $8 million contract, $8 million per year, because he's basically Draymond Green that can shoot right now. I believe in Grant Williams' 3-point shooting ability, and I believe in his defensive ability. As long as he doesn't poke the bear, they're good. And I think he would bring a lot of value to this team. Next, I would like them to target Austin Reeves. I think if you can make a trade and get rid of Simons and Sharp, I think Austin Reeves is a perfect player to pick up because as young as he is, he just proved that he can play the game of basketball at a championship level. As much as a Lakers hater I am, that's what my friends say at least, but I do believe Austin Reeves is a very, very good NBA player, and I believe that if Portland could pull off signing him for a 4-year, $20 million contract, that he could develop into the starting shooting guard on a championship level team here in Portland. And then the last 2 guys are Alex Len, 2-year, $4.6 million contract. You need a center to back up Nurkic, and he can do just that. And he doesn't need to play every game. So if there is a game where you're better off having a lineup with Grant Williams at the 5, then that's a perfect scenario because Len is not making a lot of money. He's making $4.6 million and Nurkic is making 13. That's $17 million in the center position. And you have another guy that can play there. So if you're not playing both of them, it's not like you're wasting your money with not playing them. And I'll touch on that in a different video. Like, I believe that having guys that can play small ball is very, very valuable, because I honestly believe that we've seen that having a center there isn't always the answer. And so, yeah, I believe that Alex Len should be the backup, but Grant Williams can also play there. And then, as I touched on earlier, Shake Milton, 2-year, $2.4 million, perfect backup guard. And if you have Reeves and Lillard, and then bring in Milton, Milton can play off ball. He's an off ball scorer. And when he's in the game, you can honestly have either the guard he's with between Lillard or Reeves. You can have that guard running off screens and whatnot, like the Warriors do with Curry and Thompson. Like, you can have Lillard and Reeves getting open looks, and Shake Milton, as much of a scoring guard as he is, he can also play make a little bit for you if you do need a 3-guard lineup to get Lillard and Reeves open looks. If you didn't guess from the first 4 trades that I was talking about earlier in the video, my favorite trade for Portland is with the New York Nets and acquiring Mikal Bridges and Dorian Finney-Smith. In this trade, as you can see, the Trailblazers will give up Anthony Simons, Keon Johnson, Shaedon Sharpe. The 2023 first-round pick is the 3rd overall pick. And then you can also add more picks. Like, I'm not going to get into what picks they get since I'm doing this for an off season. It's not like I'm rebuilding in 2K and I'm going to draft players later on and whatnot. But in this trade, I like getting Mikal Bridges to be the small forward for this team, especially assuming they sign Austin Reeves and have Damian Lillard. Mikal Bridges, perfect on-ball defender and perfect shooter, and I honestly think he's the second scoring option because I prefer to use Reeves as a shooter that can also play make. Bridges is a guy that just cuts really well, and having playmakers like Reeves and Lillard, like, he's going to get a lot of open looks, and especially in the paint. So, like, he'll have layups, he'll have mid-range shots, which is his specialty. Like, this is a match made in heaven right here. And then you got Dorian Finney-Smith. And as I touched on earlier, when you have that small ball lineup with Grant Williams at the 5, Dorian Finney-Smith, he's a perfect guy to play the 4 because he can defend and space the floor. And honestly, if you look at it, a 5-man lineup of Lillard, Reeves, Bridges, Finney-Smith, and Grant Williams all can space the floor. You run a 5 out, and Lillard can get to the basket at will. It's open for cutting and whatnot. Like, this could make your offense and defense championship level without having to overpay for a superstar, because Bridges is only making $21 million. And that's not an overpay for your second option at all. And I honestly do think Portland could win a championship with this lineup. I mean, well, not with this lineup, but with this roster after these trades and signings, because you have a decent amount of depth, which is the only thing I worry about. Like, definitely you got to make a move in the regular season to get more depth. Maybe you do end up trading Nurkic for a guy like Daniel Gafford, which I love, from the Wizards. I love Gafford for this team, but I'll touch on that maybe at a different time. But on the net side of this, you're going to get the 3rd overall pick, draft Scoot Henderson. And if for some reason Scoot gets drafted by the Hornets, Brandon Miller is perfect guy to draft because you have Simons, who can play point guard or shooting guard. Then you got Shaedon Sharpe, who can play small forward or shooting guard, either or. And you have your big 3 going forward, and then you also have Claxton to hold down the paint, and then Ben Simmons, you can finally figure out what you're going to do about that situation. And you also get Keon Johnson, who is still young. There's a lot of untapped potential there. He's a very athletic, explosive guy. So he still needs to work on his shooting a little bit, but in Brooklyn, he has the perfect opportunity to. And all 3 of these players you can develop, and eventually in Brooklyn you'll win because you have so much draft capital from the Kevin Durant trade, Kyrie trade, and whatever compensation you got from Harden. So I think this is a win-win trade, I'm both teams, I make this trade ASAP. And I honestly don't know why this trade hasn't been done yet. Well, that's dumb of me to say because you can't trade in the middle of playoffs. But if I'm both of these teams, as soon as you're allowed to trade, I'm making this trade. So what you see before you is what I hope is the Portland Trailblazers depth chart or roster going into the 2023-2024 season. Clearly at point guard, you got Damian Lillard, and then you got Reeves at shooting guard. That's a championship level backcourt. And then you got Bridges at small forward, perfect 3-and-D guy that is also I'm going to look at as your 2 option but he's also a 2 option that doesn't demand the ball. So like his playmaking and scoring comes from cutting and off-ball movement. So as I touched on earlier, having 2 ball dominant guards in Lillard and Reeves allows Bridges to cut and play freely without having to really dribble the ball up much to score. And I think this is a perfect trio when it comes to scoring. And then your defenders, you got Grant Williams, like as long as he's not poking bears, as I said, he perfect alongside of this team. Spaces the floor and can defend. That's all you really need if you have those 3 guys in Lillard, Reeves, and Bridges. And then Nurkic, as I said, he is a average center, and you're not going to get much better at the center position unless you overpay for a center. So I think you should leave it as is. And then your 6th man is Dorian Finney-Smith, perfect 3-and-D guy. No complaints there if I'm Portland. And then you got Shake Milton, Nasir Little, Trendon Watford, and Alex Len. Your bench needs work still, but in one off season, you're not going to reconstruct your whole bench and whatnot. But you did start with 4 guys on your bench that weren't really playable with Dame if you're trying to compete. And now you only have 2 of them, which Trendon Watford and Nasir Little, they both can still develop. Like they're good wings. So there is definitely potential to be had there, especially with their offensive abilities that they displayed in college. So playing with a team like this where they can play freely off the bench in the regular season and then maybe take a lesser role in the playoffs if you make a move during the trade deadline next year, you could definitely have yourself a championship team next year. But I honestly think with this team right now, it can probably make it to the conference finals. I don't see this team beating the Nuggets. I don't see this team necessarily beating the Suns. Actually, it pains me to say it, but this team could definitely beat the Suns. But I honestly think with the Suns starting 5 is better than Portland starting 5, and the benches both aren't that great. But anyways, it can beat the Kings. It could beat a lot of teams in the Western Conference. So this is a good start. You still got a lot of work to do, but this is, as I like to say, I make realistic videos, and this is a realistic offseason that Portland could have. And you're not really overpaying to have any players, and you can still make signings, and you still have trade flexibility in case you want to make a move during the trade deadline or another move in the offseason. I'm limiting myself in this because I honestly don't think that they can make much more moves in one offseason than what I just did. And you still need to figure out your free agent market if you don't do what I do. Like if you lose out on Austin Reeves, you got to find where that $20 million is going to go. And there's a lot of options to be had. As always, thanks for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and comment if you have anything you want to say. Follow me on Instagram at bold_hoops. And thanks for watching. And this has been Bold Hoops with Jay Hoopa. Oh, wait. Next episode, we'll be talking about Chicago Bulls And I'm sorry in advance, Chicago Bulls fans.